In a bustling hotel lobby where the chatter of travelers mingled with the clinking of glasses, a man named Eric stood near the entrance. He was in his 30s, slightly scruffy, with tired eyes and a frown etched on his forehead. He had just come from a job interview that hadn't gone as planned. As he paced nervously, he glanced at his watch, feeling the weight of every tick. While he waited, his eyes wandered around the room. The elegant chandelier sparkled above as the front desk staff moved swiftly, checking in new guests. He noticed a flash of metal on the floor, something gleaming among the marble tiles. As he looked closer, he realized it was a keycard. Without thinking, he bent down and picked it up, brushing off the dust. It felt solid in his hand, cold and unfamiliar. He flipped it over, half expecting a name or a room number, but it was blank. Curious about where it came from, Eric tilted his head toward the lobby TV, which blared the latest news report. The screen showcased the latest headlines, flickering images of city scenes, a showcase of life that felt so far removed from Eric's own. Suddenly, a red banner at the bottom caught his eye. His heart skipped a beat. The picture accompanying the headline was of a man he recognized, someone he had met at the hotel's cafe just days before. In was Tyler, a cheerful barista with a bright smile. Eric's stomach twisted. He recalled their brief conversation. Tyler had mentioned a promotion, his enthusiasm contagious. He had no idea things could spiral into something so dark. The news anchor's voice droned on, detailing how Tyler had allegedly skimmed money from transactions over the last few months. Feeling the weight of the keycard in his hand, Eric couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. Tyler had seemed so innocent. Someone like him really be capable of such things? Eric's mind raced, torn between disbelief and the undeniable reality before him. The broadcast continued, interviewing guests at the hotel, asking for their thoughts on the chaos unfolding. Eric's pulse quickened as he overheard snippets, people murmuring about trust, loyalty, and how easily things could fall apart. It was all too relatable. He was just in that very cafe a week ago, sharing his own stories, trusting the warmth in Tyler's eyes. But this feeling of unease was more than just shock. It was a reminder of his own struggle. Just days before, he had dreamed of a new life, one filled with opportunities and success. But now, standing there holding a stranger's keycard, he could feel the shadows of doubt creeping back in. What did it all mean? Eric wanted to toss the card back to the ground to forget the whole thing. But instead, he turned the keycard in his hand, still feeling the cold metal against his palm. What if the card belonged to Tyler? What if he was the last one to see him, the last one to have a piece of the puzzle before everything fell apart? He shook his head, trying to suppress the thoughts. In that moment, the lobby felt too small, the air thick with tension. He needed to know more. As the report continued, Eric found himself drawn to it, listening intently. The anchor spoke of a mysterious phone call that had set off the investigation, a call that had mentioned Tyler's name. Eric recalled their last interaction, the laughter, the shared stories, a simple connection over coffees and pastries. How could something so light turn so dark in an instant? With his heart pounding, he thought about the magnitude of what this meant. This wasn't just a story on the screen. This was someone's life. Eric felt a pull, a strange mix of affection for the barista and a need to understand what had happened. How could things unravel so quickly? He glanced back at the screen, now fixated on flashbacks of Tyler smiling behind the counter, serving drinks, making connections with customers. Eric had felt a fragment of hope reflected in that smile. He took a deep breath, deciding to leave the lobby in search for answers. He pushed through the glass door and stepped into the crisp air outside. The sun barely hung over the horizon, casting long shadows on the street, but it felt like a new day, the dawn of something unknown. As he walked toward the cafe, the cool breeze brushed against his skin, a stark contrast to the heat of the lobby. The cafe was just a few blocks away, and in a surreal way, he felt as if he was on a mission. What if Tyler needed help? What if the rumors were wrong? Stories, after all, had many sides. Eric's heart hoped for the best, but his mind prepared for the worst. When he entered the cafe, the familiar scent of coffee wrapped around him like a warm blanket. It was a small, cozy place with mismatched chairs and a hint of artsy charm. The barista behind the counter was not Tyler, but a girl with bright pink hair who flashed him a friendly smile. "Hey," she asked, her eyes sparkling. Eric blurted out, his urgency evident. She furrowed her brow. "Tyler. He hasn't been in since the news broke." Eric's gut clenched. He could feel concern washing over him. "What do you mean, not disappear?" But there were some rumors flying around. A couple of customers mentioned seeing him act strangely before all this came out. Eric's heart sank. The fragments of their conversations came rushing back to him, Tyler talking about his dreams and aspirations, how he wanted to make a difference. Everything felt like a lie. Or perhaps things just got too complicated too fast. Eric asked, gripping the keycard tightly in his pocket, the metallic edges digging into his skin. The barista sighed, shaking her head. "I want to believe he's a good guy, but sometimes we don't know what others are going through. I mean, who would suspect him? It's just..." Eric nodded, lost in thought. This wasn't just about Tyler. This was about trust, he realized, the kind of trust that ties people together. Without it, everything could collapse like a house of cards. How many lives had been touched by Tyler's kindness, and would it all be erased in one fell swoop? I think I need to find him, Eric said suddenly, deciding right then and there. Felt reckless, but he had to try. Couldn't just let the story end here. The truth was out there, and he felt an obligation to uncover it, not just for himself, but for Tyler, the man with the smile who he barely knew but felt connected to. The barista nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. If you want to get to the bottom of this, there's a small group of people meeting later tonight to discuss things. They want answers, too. Eric thanked her and left, his mind racing as the afternoon sun warmed the street. He had a new destination, a new goal. He wasn't just a spectator in this story anymore. He was part of it, and his heart felt a mix of determination and fear as he headed toward the meeting point. What would he find? Would Tyler show up? Would he be innocent, or would the truth send shockwaves through everything Eric had begun to trust? Questions spiraled through his mind, but one thing was certain. He needed to know the answers. As he arrived at the small community center, the weight of the world pressed on his shoulders. Groups of people mingled outside, some with anxious expressions, others looking determined. Eric stepped inside and the energy shifted. It was a mixture of apprehension and hope, a collective yearning for truth. While they introduced themselves, he felt like a stranger among them. But they quickly began to share their stories, tales of encounters with Tyler, each marked by kindness. As they spoke, a familiar name kept popping up: Sarah, a woman who seemed to have been close to Tyler. Eric finally asked, his voice cutting through the crowd. Her eyes widened and she took a moment before speaking. "We talked earlier," he sounded scared. "He thinks someone set him up." Eric felt the spark of hope flicker again. "Can I?" "He's hiding out," Sarah said softly. With a deep breath, Eric resolved to find him. The fear clawing at him was real, but so was the need to help. Tyler needed a friend, and maybe he could be that friend. As the group continued discussing theories, Eric started piecing things together. He couldn't let fear stop him. This wasn't just a story. This was reality for someone he barely knew, yet deeply felt connected to. He couldn't ignore that connection. After gathering more information, he set out again. With the sun dipping lower, casting long shadows between the buildings, each footstep echoed with purpose. He needed to find Tyler. The city felt different now, alive with whispers of uncertainty and hope intertwined. As he navigated the streets, he thought about trust and the fragility of connections. Each person held a part of the puzzle, but who could he truly believe? Finally, after what felt like hours of searching, he reached a small apartment building tucked away on a quiet street. He hesitated at the entrance, feeling the tension bubble within. What if Tyler was scared? What if he didn't want to see anyone? Eric wished he could take all of this weight off his shoulders, but he took a deep breath, knocked on the door, and waited. Silence. Just as he was about to give up, he heard a shuffle inside. The door creaked open, revealing Tyler, his face drawn and weary. But when their eyes met, something shifted. Tyler's voice was hesitant, as if he couldn't believe someone was there for him. "Yeah, it's me," Eric said, his voice steady. "I saw the news. I want to help." Tyler looked lost, his eyes filled with fear and doubt. "We'll figure this out together," Eric replied, stepping into the dimly lit apartment. The walls felt heavy, filled with tension. With the keycard still in his pocket, the weight was different now, no longer just a random object, but a symbol of the journey they were both on. They would uncover the truth together. As they spoke, the tension began to melt away, and Eric felt hope rising again. Hope that even in darkness they could find a way back to light. The chaotic journey had just begun, but somehow in this moment they were not alone. Together they would face the unknown. He bent down to pick up the shiny keycard that had slipped from someone's hand. As he straightened, a flicker on the lobby TV caught his eye. Breaking news blared across the screen, the bright red banner making his heart pound. "Local business owner accused of serious financial fraud," the newscaster declared, her voice steady yet urgent. On the screen, a man with familiar features stared back at him. Mark, the owner of the cafe he frequented, the man with the warm smile and kind words. As Eric stood there, clutching the keycard tightly, an unsettling chill ran down his spine. A cocktail of confusion and fear began to churn in his stomach. He had just left Mark's cafe moments ago, where they had talked about life, dreams, and the future over cups of rich espresso. How could this be happening? The man he'd seen just minutes ago was now the subject of a most dreadful accusation. A wave of disbelief swept over him. This couldn't be real. He stepped closer to the TV, the glimmers of the bustling lobby fading away. Eric clenched the keycard tighter, memories flooding back Mark's laughter as he handed him his usual order with a big grin. Their small conversations felt like yet another world. Could someone so genuine, so caring, be capable of such deceit? He wanted to shake it off, to think it was all a mistake, but the edge in the anchor's voice felt all too real. It was almost as if he could feel the cracks starting to form in the warmth of the community. The vibrant cafe he loved so much would soon be a shadow of what it once was. Eric glanced down at the keycard, still unsure of why it interested him. Maybe it belonged to Mark. It felt like fate, the kind of twist in a story that could ignite a journey, but where would it lead him? He decided to find out. A mixture of dread and determination boiled inside him as he exited the hotel and stepped into a world that seemed different now, colored by darker hues of uncertainty. The air was crisp, but a feeling of heaviness shrouded his heart. He walked the blocks toward the cafe, his mind racing. He thought about how many lives Mark had touched, how many smiles he'd served coffee with. For a moment he felt guilty for not knowing Mark better, and it struck him. This could be a turning point in not only Mark's life, but also in his. As he stood outside Tyler's cafe, now dimly lit against the setting sun, he felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with anxiety. The familiar smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the door, inviting and warm, yet a pall hung over it as if the cafe itself sensed the storm brewing within. He pushed the door open, a small bell chiming as he stepped inside. The atmosphere was heavy. A few customers sat scattered around, scripts of worry etched on their faces. The barista, a young girl with a bright blue top, was behind the counter, but she wasn't smiling. In fact, she looked as though she had been crying. It only took one glance to know she was feeling the weight of what transpired. Eric asked, his voice almost a whisper. The girl shook her head slowly, her eyes downcast. "He left a little while ago, said he needed some time," she replied, her voice shaky. "I thought he was just stressed about the cafe." Eric's heart sank. "No," she said, wiping a tear from her cheek. The word vanished struck a chord within him. What had driven Mark to hiding? All the while, the news replayed in his mind, a haunting echo of betrayal. He couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility for not just understanding Mark, but perhaps protecting him, even if it was from afar. He walked over to the cafe's seating area, searching for any hint of where Mark might be. Everything felt off. The vibrant laughter, the joyful chatter was replaced by a hush that settled like a dark cloud. He took a seat near the window, feeling the chill close in. The news kept rolling through his mind, each word sinking deeper into him. Suddenly, someone burst through the door. It was Sarah, another familiar face from the cafe. She looked frantic, breathing heavily as if she had been running. "Eric," she exclaimed, spotting him. Eric rose, surprised and relieved to see her. He asked, urgency ringing in his voice. "I just came from the community center. People are gathering there. They're worried about Mark. They're trying to figure out what's happening and how to help him," she explained, her eyes wide with concern. Eric asked. Sarah shot him a tense look. "People think he's guilty. They want to distance themselves, but I don't believe it." The weight of her words hit Eric hard. "I don't either." Without waiting for a response, they dashed out of the cafe, racing through the streets toward the center of the community. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue that felt strangely ironic against the chaos surrounding them. As they neared the building, they could see a gathering, a group of concerned patrons and friends hoping to rally around Mark in his darkest hour. The atmosphere inside was thick with energy. Voices filled the air as people shared rumors and theories, everyone speculating about how someone so well-loved could suddenly turn into a villain. Eric felt a rush of anger building. These whispers, this doubt, felt so unjust. Someone shouted from the crowd, the question echoing like a battle cry. Eric felt compelled to speak up. "Actually, I think we should start looking for him," he announced, his voice rising above the crowd. "He wouldn't just walk away, he's not that kind of man." The crowd went silent, eyes turning toward him, glimmering with hope. Sarah stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "Eric's right, Mark has always been there for us." Inspired by his words, a few others joined in, expressing their faith in Mark, recounting stories of kindness and integrity. Real emotions began to flow through the room, a unity that felt almost like a balm, easing the tension. As they shared stories, Eric felt a stirring of confidence within the thrumming chaos. He couldn't shake the urgency. He felt a raw connection to Mark, even if they hadn't been close. In that instant, he understood the fragility of trust and community. It was fragile, but also powerful. Their belief in Mark could shatter the narrative spun by the media. "Split up and find him," he said as the discussions began to wind down. With fervor, volunteers began to rise, ready to join the search. Eric felt the spark ignite. If they found Mark, if they understood the truth, they could turn the tide of those nasty rumors. They just needed to believe as a team, as a community. As Eric and Sarah ventured out into the darkening evening, the weight of the mission settled into their bones. They whispered encouragements to each other, their minds racing with possibilities. The city felt charged, filled with an urgency that felt almost electric. Where would they even start? They decided to head to places Mark loved, where he often spent his time. They walked through the streets, searching for clues, asking retailers, and peering into darkened alleys. Each moment felt taut with anticipation, but it was punctuated with hope. This wasn't just for Mark, it was for everyone who believed in him. After hours of searching, they finally found themselves at the park where Mark often relaxed with his sketchpad, where he found solace in the beauty of the world around him. It was quiet now, a soft breeze rustling through the trees. They scanned the benches, the pathways, but there was no sign of him. Eric felt despair creeping in again, threatening to extinguish the flicker of hope they'd built. He murmured, almost to himself. "He's here," Sarah insisted, determination lighting her features. "He has to be." Just then, a soft rustle came from the bushes nearby, and they both turned sharply. The hush of the park felt profound, the air thick with tension. Then, as if emerging from a haze, Mark stepped into view, looking worn and shattered. Eric called, a wave of relief flooding over him. Mark looked up, confusion playing on his features. His voice trembled as if he hadn't expected to see anyone. "We're here for you," Eric said earnestly, stepping closer. Mark's face fell, shadows of doubt still clinging to him. "It's all over, the story. It's already out." "No," Sarah interjected firmly. "You're not. We know you, Mark. You've given so much to this community." Tears brimmed in Mark's eyes as doubt fought against gratitude. "I never intended for it to happen. I swear, things got out of hand and it's just..." Eric stepped forward, the weight of the keycard suddenly feeling heavier in his pocket, now a symbol of their shared burden. "We're here to help you. We'll fight this together." Mark glanced at the two of them, a flicker of hope igniting in his weary eyes. I want to believe that." "Step by step," Eric said, emboldened. "We'll gather support. We'll show everyone who you really are. Let's start with the truth." With a hesitant nod, Mark sighed, the knot of tension beginning to unravel. That night, the three of them fell into deep conversation, unraveling the story behind the headlines, laying bare the fears that had loomed over them. They would face the world together. As dawn broke the next day, painting the sky in shades of gold, a new chapter was unfolding. The battle was only beginning, but in that moment they were not just individuals fighting against the tide. They were a team united against injustice. Together they would confront the storm and navigate the choppy waters ahead. In the end, as Eric stood alongside his friends, he held onto that keycard. It had been a simple object, but it had bridged the gap between strangers, igniting a journey of trust and community. Together, they would redefine what it meant to stand up for someone who mattered, proving that sometimes hope could shine even through the darkest of storms. Eric crouched down to pick up a glittering keycard that had slipped from someone's hand, a bright flash beneath the lobby's sparkling lights. Just as he straightened up, the TV mounted on the wall blared, drawing his attention like a magnet. His heart sank. The face on the screen was unmistakable Mark, the charming owner of the cafe he visited every morning for espresso. The man who always knew Eric's order without him having to say a word. A sense of disbelief gripped Eric, tightening like a noose around his chest. How could someone so warm and joyful be wrapped up in such a dark scandal? The anchor's voice was steady, announcing details of a shocking investigation into Mark's business practices. "Authorities suspect that funds from the cafe have been funneled into illegal activities," she said, her tone alarmingly detached. As the camera zoomed in on Mark's smile frozen in time, Eric felt an odd mix of anger and sadness churn inside him. It was as if they were tearing down the essence of who Mark was, a man who had brought so much joy to the community. Eric's fingers clutched the keycard tightly. It was cold against his palm, a solid reminder of the chaos erupting around him. He glanced at the buzzing lobby, filled with business people rushing to meetings and travelers tying up loose ends. But all he could feel was the disconnect, a sense that something deeper was breaking. He needed to know more. Pulse racing, Eric stepped outside into the crisp air, the sounds of the lobby fading behind him. As he walked toward the cafe, it felt as if the world was operating on a different frequency, one filled with gossip and shadows. Could he trust the news? Could he trust his own instincts? Turning the corner, he caught sight of Tyler's cafe. The familiar sign swung gently, but the light spilling from the windows was dimmer than usual. Inside, a few patrons lingered, eyes glued to their phones, whispers skimming the air. He stepped in, drawn by the warmth but chilled by the atmosphere. "Hey, Eric," the voice was familiar, but it belonged to Sarah, one of the baristas. She usually greeted him with a bright smile, but today her face was clouded with worry. "I just saw the news about Mark," Eric managed, struggling to keep his voice steady. A heavy pause hung in the air. "I don't know, he just left without saying much," she replied, glancing around as if fearing someone would overhear them. He looked. Eric's heart sank further. Mark had always been the backbone of this cafe, a beacon of light. Without him, it felt like the coffee shop was losing its essence. Sarah shook her head emphatically. "I refuse to believe it. I mean, have you seen what he's done for the community?" The compassion and loyalty in her voice ignited a flame of resolve in Eric. The words slipped out, filled with a certainty he hadn't expected. "We can't let this go unchallenged." Sarah nodded, determination lighting her features. "I'm in." They shared a brief look of understanding, and in that moment Eric felt a surge of purpose. They weren't just fighting for one person, they were fighting for everything Mark represented, a community built on trust and kindness. The two of them slipped out of the cafe and headed towards the community center, where they had heard rumors of a gathering for concerned friends and patrons. Each step felt heavier than the last, a mix of anticipation and dread weaving through them. But with every stride, they fortified their resolve. Once inside the community center, they were enveloped by anxious conversations heavy with uncertainty. Participants clustered around tables, murmuring, their expressions ranging from shock to anger. Eric took a deep breath, the scent of coffee still lingering from the cafe. This was about to get real. Eric called out, his voice cutting through the chatter. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, but doubt flickered across many faces. "He's embarrassed," one man said, leaning heavily on the table. A wave of frustration washed over Eric. How could they choose silence when someone they cared about was in trouble? But we can't just abandon him. "If we wait, it'll be too late," he said, desperation creeping into his tone. "Eric's right," Sarah chimed in, her voice ringing with strength. This is our chance to show him we're here for him." Their words resonated within the eager hearts of some in the crowd, creating a ripple of shared resolve. More voices joined the conversation, each person revealing their own stories about how Mark had made a difference in their lives. One spoke of a free coffee for a struggling student, another shared a story about how Mark helped gather supplies for a local shelter. Together, they built a vibrant tapestry of memories that wrapped around the fading uncertainty and filled the room with a sense of hope. Finally, a woman with striking green eyes stood up, her face resolute. "Let's split up and search for Mark. The longer he stays away, the more isolated he'll feel." Encouragement bubbled through the air, and soon Eric and Sarah were paired up, tasked with searching the nearby parks. As they left the community center, Eric felt a renewed sense of purpose, like a tide rising each time they took a step. Sarah asked, her breath visible in the chilly air. "Mark often mentions going to the park to draw sketches," Eric replied, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. The sun began to sink below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park as they approached. The crisp autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet, filling the air with a familiar scent of change. Each moment felt pregnant with possibility. All around, laughter drifted from families enjoying their evening, and it reminded him of the warmth that Mark had brought into their lives. He quickened his pace, feeling urgency in his steps as they rounded the corner toward a secluded bench, the spot he and Mark had spoken at more times than he could remember. And there he was. Mark sat on the bench, sketchpad open, pencil resting loosely in his hand. His face was pale, eyes reflecting an inner turmoil that made Eric's heart ache. For a moment, Mark seemed lost in his own world, oblivious to the chaos surrounding him. Eric shouted, his voice cutting through the haze of silence that surrounded them. Mark looked up, startled, his expression shifting from fear to confusion. Mark's voice was barely above a whisper, vulnerability catching in the air. "It's precisely why we did," Sarah interjected, stepping closer. "We care about you, Mark." A silence enveloped them, thick and heavy. Mark's breath caught slightly as his eyes darted between Eric and Sarah, the reality of their presence settling on him like a blanket. "I don't know how to face what's happening," he admitted, a hint of panic tightening his voice. "No one believes that it is," Eric said, determination lacing his words. "You've built a legacy here and we're all willing to fight for you." The tension in Mark's shoulders softened, even if just slightly. "I heard the way people reacted. They've turned their backs on me already," he murmured, shame casting shadows across his face. "But we won't," Sarah countered fiercely. "People are scared, but they also care. You've given them so much joy." As the three of them sat there, the world around them faded. The park, once a hub, transformed into their cocoon, where they could focus solely on each other. Eric could see the flickers of uncertainty in Mark's eyes start to wane. "I can't let this destroy what I've built," Mark finally confessed, voice breaking as he fought against the wave of emotion. And right there, under the fading daylight, something shifted. The three of them began to talk not just about the accusations, but also about the life that Mark had built, the laughter, the recipes, and the sketches he left behind. Together, they began to strategize, forming a plan not only to defend Mark, but to remind the community of the heart and soul he had poured into every cup of coffee served. As they began their journey back to the community center, Eric felt the weight of the keycard in his pocket. What had started as a simple object had led him to a revelation, the realization that community mattered, trust mattered, and together they could confront whatever lay ahead. Once inside the center, the atmosphere felt different. Participants looked up as if sensing a shift. The stories of hope they shared earlier glimmered in their eyes as Eric, Mark, and Sarah stood united. Eric shouted, pulling everyone's attention, "We're not going to let accusations tear us apart." A chorus of voices began to rise in support. As conversations ignited, the room buzzed with purpose. With every story recounted, with every voice joining in solidarity, Mark began to stand taller, the shadows of doubt receding. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but in that moment hope flickered like a candle small, yet brightly illuminating their resolve. The dawn was still far off, but as they united, they built a fire of hope that would guide them through the long night ahead. Together they would remain vigilant, a community fighting back against the darkness. They would stand as one not just for Mark, but for the essence of who they all could be. He picked up the shiny keycard, its surface gleaming in the hotel lobby light. Just a moment before, it had been lost among the scurry of travelers, but now it was in his grip. Eric didn't think much of it at first. His mind was elsewhere, burdened by the weight of a recent breakup and job worries. As he stood up, still lost in thought, the TV mounted on the wall blared out breaking news. His heart quickened as he turned to face the screen. The news anchor's voice cut through the lobby's buzz, its tone serious. The image on the screen was unmistakable. Mark's friendly face, usually so welcoming behind the counter of Tyler's cafe, now pivoted into something sinister. Eric's breath hitched in his throat. He could hardly believe it. Mark had been the very man who had served him coffee just days ago. Nothing about their conversation suggested criminal activity. Instead, Mark had spoken of dreams, plans for the cafe, and how he wanted to expand his little business into a community hub. Eric's mind raced. If this were true, then what was the world coming to? The television blared on, detailing accusations that funds had mysteriously disappeared, funneled into untraceable accounts. The moment the anchor said the phrase, "local hero turned suspect," a chill ran down Eric's spine. Could someone so generous, so dedicated to his community, really be lying behind the scenes? He thought of the countless times Mark had brought in extra pastries or offered free coffee to those in need. Eric's grip tightened around the keycard. Suddenly it felt like a lifeline, a way to piece together the unraveling mystery. He glanced around the lobby. People hurried past, oblivious to the storm whirling in his head. He had to do something. The news wasn't just sensational gossip, it targeted someone he cared about. Leaving the noise of the lobby behind, Eric stepped out into the cool air. The world outside felt distorted, like a painting gone wrong. He walked toward Tyler's cafe, intent on uncovering the truth. His legs moved almost as if on autopilot, each step driven by an urgency that was hard to ignore. He could see the cafe in the distance, its warm lights flickering in the encroaching dusk. As he moved closer, he noticed the tension that hung in the air, the usual chatter replaced by worried whispers. He could see a few familiar faces, customers who, like him, were connected to Mark. As he pushed through the door, the warmth of the cafe wrapped around him, but the atmosphere felt heavy. It was more somber than usual, a blanket of worry smothering the lively spirit that had characterized the cafe. Eric. Sarah, the barista with bright blue hair, looked relieved and worried all at once. "I just saw the news about Mark," Eric said, trying to contain his disbelief. She glanced around before lowering her voice. "He hasn't been here since the news broke." There was a pause, the kind that spoke volumes. The cafe, usually a hub of joy and laughter, felt like a tomb. Eric could see the weariness in the eyes of those around him. People huddled in small groups, sharing rumors and fears. Eric asked, leaning in closer. "I don't want to believe it," Sarah said firmly, but her voice lacked conviction. "Mark's been nothing but good to all of us." Just then, the TV in the corner flickered on again, another news segment about Mark's alleged wrongdoing. Words like investigation, charges, and community reactions filled the air, amplifying the sense of despair. People turned their gaze away, unable to watch anymore. "I can't stand this," Eric said, the weight of it pressing heavily on him. "We have to do something." Sarah nodded, determination sparking in her eyes. "You're right, we can't just sit around." They made quick plans, knowing time was of the essence. Their first stop would be the community center nearby, where people were gathering to discuss how they could support Mark. As they walked, Eric's mind raced. What could they possibly say to convince others that Mark was more than a headline? The community center buzzed with anxious energy when they arrived. Voices overlapped as people shared their fears and concerns. Eric stepped forward, heart pounding in his chest. He called out. The crowd quieted, turning to face him, eyes filled with uncertainty. "We should give him space," someone finally said. "No," Eric replied, desperation creeping into his tone. "It's just the kind of low moment where he needs us." A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd. People began to share their own stories about Mark, the kindness, the late-night hours he kept just to ensure everyone felt welcome. The stories poured out, revealing the heart of a man who was deeply embedded in their lives. With each story shared, Eric felt hope and unity starting to brew, but they had to act fast. "Let's split up," he suggested. "If we all search in pairs, we can cover more ground." Without hesitation, people began forming pairs, a sense of urgency lighting their eyes. Eric found himself paired with Sarah as they both made their way toward the park. As they hurried, the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows on the ground. Sarah asked as they walked, concern coloring her voice. "He could be," Eric admitted, a heavy knot forming in his stomach, "but hiding won't fix this." When they arrived at the park, the sun had nearly set, leaving a canvas of deep blue overhead. They scanned the benches and pathways, calls of a few distant children playing almost mockingly joyful against their serious mission. But soon they saw a figure sitting alone on a distant bench. As they approached, Eric's heart raced. It was Mark, his posture defeated, facing the ground. No sketchbed in sight, all that surrounded him was a cloud of sorrow. Eric shouted, his voice filled with relief. The figure looked up slowly, confusion morphing into dread as it fell on him. Mark's voice was raw, like he was holding back tears. "We're here for you," Sarah said, stepping closer. "We just saw the news." Mark's gaze fell to the ground again, a mixture of shame and fear crossing his face. "I can't face anyone." Eric's heart broke at those words. "It's not too late to fix this, but you can't hide." "I don't even know if I'm innocent," Mark confessed, the anguish in his voice palpable. "I've been distracted lately, juggling too many things." Eric knelt down before him, looking him straight in the eye. "You're not in this alone. You've built a community, and we want to fight for you together." There was a long silence as Mark wrestled with his emotions. Finally, he took a deep breath and began to share his story. He talked about the pressures of running a small business during tough economic times, about mistakes he had made while trying to keep the cafe afloat. As the words flowed, Eric could see the weight lifting from Mark's shoulders. Sarah listened intently, her eyes shimmering with empathy. "This is what we need to hear," she affirmed. But doubt flickered on Mark's face. "What if they don't care?" "They will care," Eric insisted, his heart racing. A little clarity will go a long way. You've touched so many lives. And slowly, a spark of hope danced in Mark's eyes. They will, Sarah said firmly, determination etched across her features. With a monumental effort, Mark slowly nodded, his face shifting from despair to a glimmer of resolve. As they made their way back to the community center, the air felt lighter. Mark, who had once portrayed defeat, now walked with renewed purpose. The group that had gathered in the center welcomed him back with open arms, and as he shared his truth, the crowd began to rally behind him. They listened intently as Mark spoke about the pressure he had faced and how mistakes had been made. But even more importantly, he spoke about his unwavering love for the community, the people he had poured his heart into every day. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. They were no longer just passive listeners. Instead, they became a unified front, a collective voice standing against the narrative spun by the news. Statements of support echoed through the room. "We remember you, Mark," one voice said. With each passing moment, the tide turned. The crowd swelled with empathy as they shared their experiences of Mark's kindness. It was as if a dam had broken, allowing love and trust to flood back in. As the meeting came to an end, Eric caught Mark's eye. Gratitude shimmered in his friend's gaze, a silent acknowledgement that they had weathered the storm together. With the night drawing to a close, Eric felt a profound sense of connection to everyone around him, bound together by a search for the truth and the courage to stand up for each other. Lives had intertwined in ways he hadn't anticipated, forming a tapestry they all had a hand in creating. He looked down at the keycard still resting in his pocket, a small but powerful token of the journey they had all embarked on. What had started as a simple object had turned into a symbol of community, solidarity, and perseverance in the face of adversity. As the flickering lights in the community center dimmed, Eric understood that while the road ahead was still uncertain, they wouldn't walk it alone. Together, they would navigate every twist and turn, proving that sometimes, against all odds, hope could light the way forward. He picked up the keycard, its glossy surface gleaming under the flickering fluorescent lights of the hotel lobby. Just a moment earlier, it had slipped from a guest's hand, landing almost at Eric's feet. He felt a strange pull to it, as if it were a clue to something larger. Little did he know that this small moment would spiral into a whirlwind of chaos. As he straightened, the lobby buzzed with the usual hum of travelers checking in and out. Eric had come for a conference, dragging himself through an uninspiring corporate world that felt more like a hamster wheel than a path forward. He sighed, thinking more about his life than the bright colors of the card he now held. But as he turned to toss it back onto the marble floor, a news segment playing on the large flat-screen TV caught his eye. The news anchor's voice was calm, yet urgent. The crisp image of Mark's smiling face drew Eric's gaze like a moth to a flame. Eric's heart sank. He recognized Mark, the owner of the cafe he visited every morning when he was in town. Mark had always been friendly, serving excellent coffee with an infectious smile. It didn't make sense. How could this man whom Eric regarded as a beacon of warmth be implicated in something so dark? The anchor continued, detailing how customers were horrified, expressing disbelief as the story unfolded. Authorities say that funds from Thompson's cafe have been funneled into illegal accounts for months, she reported. And in that moment, Eric felt as if the ground beneath him was shifting. He gripped the keycard as if it were a lifeline. What if it could help him uncover the truth? The weight of the situation hit him hard. He couldn't just stand by and watch someone he admired be dragged through the mud without a fight. Determined, he stepped outside, leaving the chaotic lobby behind. The crisp air was refreshing, filling his lungs and sharpening his focus. He needed to find answers. Mark needed him. As he walked toward the cafe, his mind raced. Was this all just a misunderstanding? Could someone as genuine as Mark actually be guilty of wrongdoing? The cafe came into view, its warm lights glowing like a lighthouse in the dark, yet the atmosphere felt heavy as he stepped inside. The usual aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods hung in the air but was laced with tension. Customers sat hunched over their phones, absorbed in the unfolding drama, and whispers filled the space. It felt more like a wake than a cafe. Sarah, one of the baristas with vibrant blue hair, looked up, her face etched with worry. "Yeah," he replied, his voice low. "What's going on?" Shaking her head, Sarah glanced around as if afraid someone might overhear. "He left this morning. I think he's hiding." She faltered, her concern almost palpable. Eric felt a knot form in his stomach. Mark had always been the kind of guy who lifted everyone's spirits. How could he have fallen so far so fast? Eric asked, gripping the keycard tighter. "No way," Sarah insisted, her eyes flashing with conviction. "He's always been supportive of the community. He wouldn't risk everything he built." Eric nodded slowly, a surge of determination igniting within him. "We have to find him. We can't let this go unchallenged. We should gather some people," Sarah agreed. As the two of them quickly formulated a plan, Eric felt the weight of purpose settle on him. This wasn't just about Mark anymore, it was about what they all stood for. He wanted to stand up for someone who had dedicated his life to uplifting others. After gathering a small group of supportive regulars, they decided to head to the community center where people were meeting to discuss Mark and share their thoughts. As they walked, Eric's heart raced with the reality of what they might face. Would they find someone willing to believe in Mark? Arriving at the community center, the atmosphere was tense. Concerned faces crammed into corners, voices rising in anxiety, but there was also something else, a simmering energy, a desire to fight back against false narratives. Eric called out, feeling the urgency surge through him. A few heads turned, their expressions a mix of worry and sadness. "He's hiding out, feeling ashamed," one woman muttered. Eric exclaimed, his voice rising above the murmurs. "This is exactly the time he needs us. We have to remind him who he is." Some murmurs of agreement followed his outburst. People nodded, their eyes reflecting shared determination. A man shouted, his voice ringing with resolve. The group quickly broke into smaller teams, and Eric found himself paired with Sarah again. Together, they raced toward the local park where Mark often went to unwind. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, but Eric felt the weight of the situation dampening the beauty around him. Sarah asked, concern threading her voice. "I hope so. He needs to know he's not alone," Eric replied, clenching the keycard in his pocket. When they arrived at the park, the sunlight was fading quickly, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch fingers into the darkness. The world was eerily quiet, and as they cautiously made their way along the paths, Eric felt a deep sense of unease settling in his chest. Which bench could he be on? What if they didn't find him? But just as doubt began to creep in, they noticed a familiar figure on a distant benchmark, his head bowed, looking small and defeated. Eric shouted, a rush of relief flooding him. Mark looked up, startled. His face was drawn, vulnerability etched in the lines of worry. He asked, voice broken, "We're here for you," Sarah said, stepping closer. "You don't have to go through this alone." Mark's gaze dropped again, the weight of shame pressing down on him. "I can't face anyone. I've let everyone down," he whispered, the pain in his voice almost too much to bear. "Mark, listen to me," Eric said, kneeling in front of him, trying to meet his eyes. "This isn't over. We're here to fight for you." "But it looks bad," Mark murmured, tears threatening to spill. "I'm being painted as a criminal in the news. You think we don't know?" "We hear the whispers, the doubts," Sarah chimed in, her voice steady yet filled with compassion. "But you've always been there for our community. Now it's our turn to be there for you." Slowly, Mark began to share his side of the story, how the pressures of running the cafe had weighed on him, how the choices he made in desperation had led him to this precipice. It was a story filled with struggle, human flaws, and a profound desire to do right by everyone. As he spoke, Eric felt determination swelling up. This was not just about accusations, it was about the heart and soul of the man he had come to admire. They were all in this battle together. "Let's go back to the community center," Eric urged. "You've got to tell them your side." Mark hesitated, the doubts lingering like ghosts in the back of his mind, but looking at Eric and Sarah, seeing the unwavering belief in their eyes, something shifted within him. "Okay," he said quietly, hope beginning to seep back into his voice. As they made their way back, Eric felt an exhilarating rush of energy. Together, they would lift Mark up from this abyss. When they arrived at the crowded community center, the atmosphere was thick with emotion. Everyone turned to face them, and as Mark stepped up to the microphone, Eric could feel the palpable tension in the room. "I want to share my truth," Mark said, his voice trembling but strong. "I've made mistakes, and I'm scared." The crowd listened intently, the weight of silence punctuated by Mark's heartfelt confession. He spoke about how he had wanted to expand the cafe, dreaming of providing more than just coffee. Yet in the pursuit of that dream, he had stumbled into confusion and missteps that had spiraled out of control. As he spoke, Eric could see the crowd begin to shift. Judgment was being replaced with empathy. Stories began to echo around the room, tales of kindness, of moments when Mark had helped others, showed up when it mattered most. Gradually, a collective resolve stirred within them, a determination to rally behind one of their own. When Mark finished speaking, applause erupted, deep and resonant. Eric's heart swelled at that moment. This was the community Mark had built, and they were standing firm, united in their belief. Someone shouted. The room erupted in a chorus of affirmation as more voices joined in. They would hold vigils, write letters, share their stories online. The power of collective action radiated through the room, uplifting everyone in the process. As the night wore on, Eric felt a lightness in the air, a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life for too long. He had entered the hotel lobby that day feeling lost and detached, but now he was part of something beautiful. With each voice that joined the chorus, they became a force to be reckoned with, a community demanding justice and truth, a community that refused to let one of their own stand alone. Underneath the weight of that small keycard, Eric discovered profound lessons about trust, resilience, and the unstoppable power of unity. In the face of adversity, they stood together, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead, proving that justice and compassion could prevail, even when it seemed impossible. And as he left the community center, Eric knew this was only the beginning. Together, they would show the world who Mark truly was, raising their voices until the truth rang clear as a bell. And in that moment, he was no longer just Eric, a lost traveler in the corporate world. He was part of a tapestry woven from the threads of trust, hope, and an unbreakable bond forged in the fires of adversity. He picked up the keycard, its shiny surface catching the light in the hotel lobby. As he straightened up, still pondering the mundane worries of life, the TV mounted on the wall caught his attention. The news anchor's voice pierced through the bustling noise of travelers, an urgent tone that made his heart race. "Breaking news tonight, local businessman Mark Thompson is under investigation for fraud," the anchor said, the words hitting Eric like a punch to the gut. The screen displayed a familiar face mark, the owner of Tyler's Cafe, where Eric had often shared warm conversations over coffee. How could this be happening? Panic fluttered in his chest as more details flooded the screen. Allegations of missing funds, accusations of deceit woven into the fabric of the life Mark had built. This couldn't be right. Mark had always been the friendly face behind the counter, the man who made everyone feel welcome, who poured love into every cup of coffee. Felt a wave of disbelief crash over him. It was as if the foundation of his own world had cracked. Eric's fingers tightened around the keycard, a small object suddenly imbued with significance. It felt like an omen, a harbinger of the chaos that now engulfed the cafe he held dear. This was a crisis, and he wasn't just going to stand by and watch. After dropping the keycard on the reception desk, he stepped outside, breathing in the cool evening air. Determination filled him. He had to know more. He had to find Mark. If anyone could uncover the truth, it was Eric. He felt compelled to act, as if the very fabric of community was at stake. Walking toward Tyler's Cafe, the familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee drew him in like a moth to a flame. But as he approached, he could sense the unease that hung in the air. The cafe, usually alive with laughter and conversation, now felt somber. Patrons were glued to their phones, whispers swirling like ghosts. Sarah, the barista with bright blue hair, looked up, her smile tinged with worry. "Yeah," Eric replied, his heart heavy. "He just left earlier today," she said, glancing around as if the walls might be listening. "I think he's hiding. People have been asking questions and speculating." Eric's heart sank. This wasn't just gossip, it was a man's life being unraveled. "We have to find him." Sarah's eyes sparkled with resolve. "You're right, he's done so much for the community." They sprang into action, calling on other regulars to join them, a small army of support fighting against the creeping shadows of doubt surrounding Mark. As they communicated, Eric felt a swell of determination. This wasn't just about coffee and pastries. This was about who they were as a community. Everyone agreed to meet at the community center to discuss how to approach the situation. Each step felt heavy with purpose as they made their way there, the reality of their mission weighing down on them, a mission that felt monumental but necessary. Once they arrived at the community center, the atmosphere was thick with tension. People were gathered in clusters, voices overlapping with concern. Eric felt a sense of urgency bubbling inside him. He stepped forward, heart racing. He called out, his voice cutting through the chatter. Heads turned toward him, expressions a mix of fear and disbelief. "He's hiding," one woman said softly. Eric interjected, the passion in his voice rising. "This is exactly when he needs us." Several voices began murmuring in agreement, a chorus of support swelling around him. "We should go find him," someone suggested. With that, the crowd began to mobilize, intention sparking through the air. Eric found himself paired with Sarah once again. Together they would scour parks, coffee shops, and anywhere else they thought Mark might be. Sarah asked as they walked, her brows knitted in concern. "Mark often goes to the park near the cafe when he needs to think," Eric replied, the sun setting in the distance, casting long shadows. He picked up the pace, urgency driving him forward. When they arrived at the park, a hush enveloped them. The fading light painted the surroundings in eerie hues, and as they scanned the benches, the weight of uncertainty settled in. In the distance they saw him. Mark sat hunched on a bench, looking lost, his typical confidence washed away. Eric shouted, breathless with relief. Mark looked up, confusion mixing with fear. He asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We're here for you," Sarah said gently, approaching with care. "You don't have to go through this alone." Mark looked down, shame filling his gaze. "I can't face anyone." "That's not true," Eric said, kneeling to meet his eyes. "You've done so much for this community." Tears welled in Mark's eyes. "But the news, people will believe in you," Sarah interjected. "They just need to hear your side." "I don't even know where to begin," Mark murmured, a flicker of hope threading through his despair. "Start by telling us your story," Eric encouraged. "We'll help you share it." Mark took a deep breath, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Okay," he said, his voice steadier. As he began to unfold the series of events that had led him to this moment, Eric listened intently. Mark shared how the pressure to keep his cafe afloat had led him to make choices that he never intended. It was a story rooted in desperation, the fear of failure amplifying the mistakes that had blossomed out of control. Through every word, Eric felt the weight of Mark's guilt and anxiety. "Just a few miscalculations turned into a nightmare," Mark explained. But in that moment of vulnerability, Eric saw strength, the strength of a man willing to confront his mistakes. They were flaws born from humanity, not a darkness in his character. "We need to get back to the community center," Eric urged. "You have to tell them what you just shared with us." Mark hesitated, and Eric could see the gears turning in his mind. It was a monumental step to take. They will, Sarah said firmly, clasping Mark's shoulder. But only if you stand up and share your truth. You've built this community. Exchange between the three of them stirred something deep within Mark. Finally, he nodded. Walking back toward the community center, the air felt charged, the gravity of the moment settling in. Eric's heart raced, fueled by a mix of fear and hope. This was a pivotal point. Mark was taking a stand, stepping into the light to reclaim his narrative. When they arrived at the community center, the atmosphere pulsated with anxious energy. People stood in clusters, eyes darting as concern morphed into genuine apprehension. As Mark approached the microphone, the room fell silent. All eyes turned toward him. "Thank you for coming," Mark began, his voice trembling. He took a breath, steadying himself. As he opened up, recounting the mistakes he had made, the struggles he faced, the crowd leaned in closer, their expressions softening. They were no longer just spectators, but a community standing at the edge, ready to support one of their own. With every word, Mark's confidence grew, breaking down the walls of doubt. He spoke about the love he had for the cafe and the people in it. "I never tried to hurt anyone," he implored. "I wanted to uplift." Hope flickered in the eyes of the crowd. As he concluded, an eruption of applause filled the room, washing over him like a warmth he hadn't expected. It was more than just applause, it was acceptance, understanding, and unity. Someone shouted from the crowd, others chimed in with shouts of support, memories shared of how Mark had positively impacted their lives. This was the community he had fought for, and now they were ready to stand by him. They began discussing ways to clear his name, writing letters, sharing their experiences online, and rallying to show the truth that had been buried beneath the noise of scandal. As the evening unfolded, Eric witnessed a shift within Mark. Hope illuminated his features, the burden of shame beginning to lift. In that space, Eric realized their collective power could reshape the narrative, could bring light to the darkness that threatened to overshadow them all. Later that night, as Eric departed the community center, he reflected on the small keycard that had started it all. What had seemed like an insignificant object had catalyzed a journey of truth, courage, and unwavering support. It had brought them all together, reminded them all of their shared humanity. With each step back to his hotel, Eric felt a renewed sense of purpose. He saw the strength of community unfold in real time, a visceral testament to the power of trust and resilience. They'd fought against fear, and together they'd emerged stronger. As he turned the keycard over in his hand, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had stepped into an unexpected story, one filled with heart and connection, and he knew it was just the beginning. They would fight for Mark, and in doing so, they would redefine their community, affirming that even in the darkest times, hope could reignite. In that moment, he understood the truth of human experience, the struggles, the triumphs, the unwavering spirit of connection, and he knew that together they would continue to rise no matter what the world threw at them. He bent down to pick up the keycard that had slipped from someone's hand, its shiny surface catching the light in the hotel lobby. As he straightened, the TV on the wall blared with breaking news, the anchor's voice sharp and urgent. Eric's heart dropped, a cold chill washing over him. That name, Mark Thompson, was all too familiar. The owner of Tyler's Cafe, the place where he found solace each morning among the rich aroma of coffee and the warmth of a friendly smile. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. The news anchor continued, detailing how funds from Mark's cafe had mysteriously disappeared, funneled into questionable ventures. Images of Mark, a man who had always greeted Eric with a genuine smile, flashed across the screen. Eric's stomach twisted. How could someone so kind be implicated in something so dark? He felt a surge of anger and disbelief. A man he respected was being painted as a villain. That couldn't be true. As chaos unfolded in the lobby around him, he gripped the keycard tightly. It felt like a lifeline, a spark of hope in a brewing storm. He stepped outside into the bustling city, where the air struck him like a reminder of everything he needed to do. Mark needed support, and Eric was determined to find him. He couldn't stand idly by while rumors crashed down like waves, threatening to pull Mark under. Once he arrived at Tyler's Cafe, the familiar sight felt different somehow. The usual warmth was overshadowed by a palpable tension. Patrons whispered in hushed tones, their eyes glued to their phones, absorbing the latest developments. Sarah, one of the baristas, called out, her voice a mix of relief and worry. "Yeah," he replied, his heart heavy. "Mark just left this morning," she said, glancing around nervously. "People have been asking too many questions." Eric's heart sank further. Mark had always been the one to lift others up. Now he was hiding, afraid to face the very people he had served for years. "We have to find him," Eric said, urgency coursing through him. Sarah's eyes lit up with determination. "You're right, we can't let this happen without a fight." So they rallied a small group of regulars, friends, and patrons who shared Mark's love for the cafe. As they gathered, Eric's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about coffee. It was about loyalty, friendship, and standing together against a storm. They decided to meet at the community center nearby, where people were gathering to discuss how to support Mark. Every step toward the center felt like a march toward battle, an emotional turmoil of hope and fear swirling within Eric. Would they really make a difference? Arriving at the community center, the atmosphere was thick with tension. People clustered in groups, voices overlapping, their expressions a mix of dread and disbelief. Eric stepped forward, heart pounding. He called out, heads turned, and for a moment silence hung in the air. He's hiding, one man finally spoke, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Eric exclaimed, feeling desperation wash over him. This is exactly the moment he needs us. We can't abandon him. Gradually, nods began to ripple through the crowd. We should find him, someone suggested. And just like that, the group split into pairs, committed to a search. Eric paired with Sarah again, their mission clear: locate Mark and support him. Sarah asked, her voice shaking slightly. He might be, Eric replied firmly, but hiding won't change anything. With purposeful resolve, they made their way toward the park where Mark often went to clear his head. As they walked, the sun dipped lower in the sky, shadows stretching long. The park loomed in view, a sanctuary that felt heavy with unspoken worries. Approaching the familiar spot, fear gripped Eric's heart. What if they couldn't find him? What if he had slipped away entirely? But as they moved closer, a sight caught their breath, a figure hunched on a distant bench. Eric shouted, his voice breaking the stillness. Mark looked up, surprise and fear flashing across his face. He asked, his voice almost a whisper. "We're here for you," Sarah said gently, stepping forward. "Please don't feel like you have to face this alone." Mark's eyes dropped, the weight of despair heavy on his shoulders. "I can't face anyone," he admitted, shame flooding his expression. "That's not true, Mark," Eric said, kneeling to meet his gaze. "You've done so much for this community. I don't even know how to begin," Mark admitted, tears pooling in his eyes. "Start by sharing your story," Sarah encouraged. "You owe it to yourself and to us." With a deep breath, Mark started to speak, revealing the layers of confusion and desperation that had led him to this moment. He shared how the pressures of running the cafe had spiraled into mistakes, ones he never intended to make. As he unraveled the truth, Eric could see the shame begin to lift, replaced with a timid resolve. They listened intently as Mark chronicled the choices that had led to this point, the moss of anxiety that had hidden his intentions. With every word, Eric felt the weight of understanding in the air. This was a man who cared deeply, who had poured his soul into his cafe. "Just a few bad choices turned my world upside down," Mark confessed, his voice faltering. "Let's get back to the community center," Eric urged, feeling a rush of determination. "You need to tell them the truth," Mark hesitated. "They will," Eric insisted, his resolve unwavering. "But you have to be brave enough to stand up and share your story." After a moment of contemplation, Mark nodded slowly. As they made their way back, the air crackled with energy. Returning to the community center felt monumental. People had gathered once again, faces filled with concern but with a growing sense of solidarity. As Mark approached the microphone, the crowd fell silent, every eye locked onto him. "Thank you all for being here," Mark began. His voice quivered slightly, the moment monumental for him. He opened up, his words spilling out, laden with honesty and vulnerability. He shared how the cafe was not just a job, but a labor of love, a place where he had always aimed to uplift others. He spoke of the pressure that had become overwhelming and how he mismanaged things in attempts to keep afloat. As he spoke, the crowd began to shift, the atmosphere transforming. Expressions of doubt were replaced with empathy, and Mark felt the warmth of their support. Stories rolled in from all corners, people recalling moments where Mark had gone above and beyond for the community-free meals for struggling families, a place for weary travelers to rest. With each story shared, the tide turned and Mark's vulnerability transformed into strength. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," he implored. When he finished speaking, the room erupted in applause, a deep, resonant sound that washed over him like a cleansing rain. Eric felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes as he witnessed this transformation. Someone shouted from the crowd. The chorus of voices echoed through the room, uniting everyone. Another person yelled. They began discussing plans, letters of support, social media campaigns, and ways to organize around Mark's integrity. As the evening unfolded, Eric felt the weight of despair lift. This wasn't just about one man, it was about a community reclaiming their power, proving that they wouldn't let fear win. Mark stood at the center, no longer a solitary figure, but embraced by a tapestry of support. Later that night, Eric reflected on the keycard that had started this whirlwind, the small object that had drawn him into an unexpected journey. It had become a symbol of connection and resilience, uniting everyone in their shared fight for truth. As he walked back toward his hotel, Eric was filled with a profound sense of purpose. He had witnessed the strength of community firsthand and felt changed by the experience. It was more than just coffee. It was a testament to what they could achieve together when they stood for one another. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but one thing was clear: they wouldn't back down. Mark's story would be told, and together they would shine a light on the truth. In that moment, Eric realized it was not just Mark who had been saved. It was the community itself that had embodied strength through vulnerability. They had transformed uncertainty into a compelling narrative of hope and resilience, reminding each other of their shared humanity. That small keycard was a catalyst, leading them into a space of connection and understanding. Together, they would navigate whatever darkness lay ahead, proving that in strength and unity, hope could always flourish. A new chapter awaited, a moment of truth and solidarity, forging a path illuminated by the power of their camaraderie. He bent down to retrieve the keycard lying on the polished marble floor of the hotel lobby. As he stood up, something on the wall-mounted TV flickered to life, capturing his attention. The news anchor's voice was urgent, laden with drama. Eric's heart dropped. The name struck him like a thunderbolt. Mark, the jovial owner of Tyler's Cafe, where he had spent countless mornings enjoying the rich aroma of coffee and the warmth of friendly banter. The news flashed Mark's picture across the screen, that same smile now twisted into something sinister. Eric felt a rising tide of disbelief wash over him. This couldn't be happening. As the anchor detailed accusations of missing funds and questionable transactions, Eric's grip tightened around the keycard. It felt heavy in his palm, a symbol of chaos brewing behind the scenes. He could still picture Mark serving coffee with infectious enthusiasm, joking about life. How could someone like that be involved in something so corrupt? Taking a shaky breath, Eric stepped outside into the cool evening air. The bustling city felt different now, like a stage set for a tragedy he never wanted to witness. He needed answers. He needed to know what was happening. Rushing toward Tyler's Cafe, his mind raced. Would Mark even be there? Would he feel safe? Eric pushed the door open, a little bell chiming cheerfully despite the storm brewing inside him. But inside, the air felt thick with dread. The usual laughter had been replaced with concerned whispers, and patrons clutched their phones like lifelines, eyes darting with anxiety. Sarah, one of the baristas with bright blue hair, looked up, her usual spark dimmed. "Yeah," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's going on?" "I don't know," she said, glancing around as if fearing someone would overhear them. "He left earlier today. It's like he just vanished." Eric felt a knot form in his stomach. Mark had always been someone who brought joy to others. Now he was hiding, trapped inside a whirlwind of doubt and fear. "We've got to find him," Eric declared, urgency flooding his veins. "He needs our support." Sarah's eyes narrowed with determination. "You're right. We can't let this happen without a fight." They quickly rallied a few regulars and decided to meet at the community center to discuss how to approach the situation. Each step toward that center felt monumental, like stepping onto a battlefield for a cause greater than themselves. As they arrived, the scene before them was chaotic, people huddled together, speaking in hushed tones, expressions a potion of worry and disbelief. Eric took a deep breath, the weight of the situation pressing on him. He called out, his voice cutting through the tension. Heads turned, and for a moment silence blanketed the crowd. "He's hiding," someone said, their voice heavy with defeat. Eric exclaimed, the passion rising in his voice. "This is when he needs us the most." Gradually, murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. Shouted a woman in the back, her voice rising with newfound resolve. With the plan set, the group quickly began to split off in pairs. Eric paired with Sarah again, their paths intertwined in this fight for justice. Determination fueled their pace as they set off toward the local park, a place Mark often visited to clear his mind. Sarah asked, glancing up at Eric as they walked. "He might be," Eric replied, feeling the weight of uncertainty settle deep in his chest, "but hiding won't solve anything." Arriving at the park, the sun was setting, casting long shadows and painting the sky in deep hues of orange and purple. The air was still, a heavy silence hanging over them. They scanned the benches, searching for any sign of Mark. Doubts crept in, but just as fear threatened to creep into Eric's heart, he spotted a figure off to the side. Eric shouted, relief flooding through him as he pivoted toward the familiar silhouette. Mark looked up, surprise twisting his expression. His voice was thin, almost breaking. "We're here for you," Sarah urged, stepping closer. "You don't have to go through this alone." For a heartbeat, Eric thought he saw a flicker of hope in Mark's eyes, but it quickly dimmed. "I can't face anyone," Mark whispered, pain etched in his face. "That's not true, Mark," Eric said, kneeling so he could look directly into Mark's eyes. "You've done so much for this community." But Mark shook his head, and Eric could see the shame twisting inside him. "Look at the news, it's all over the place. People will believe in you, but you have to find the courage to stand up and tell your side of the story," Sarah insisted, her voice steady with conviction. Mark hesitated, the weight of his pain pressing down on him like a heavy cloud. But in that moment, Eric could see the struggle within an internal battle between fear and the possibility of redemption. "Okay," Mark finally said, his voice stronger. "I'll do it." As they made their way back to the community center, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. Eric felt exhilarated, as if they were charging into battle, armed with conviction and the strength of their friendship. Back at the center, the energy pooled in the room, filled with curious eyes and anxious hearts. Mark approached the microphone, the weight of expectation palpable. "Thank you for being here," he began, his voice trembling. With each word, he delved deeper into his reality, the pressures of running the cafe, the evolution of mistakes made, the good intentions lost in a confusing maze. He spoke about being overwhelmed, about how that burden clouded his judgment and led him to make choices he never intended. As he spoke, Eric watched the crowd shift, emotions flowing through them like a river. People leaned in, paying attention as he laid bare his vulnerabilities. Murmurs of understanding began to ripple through the crowd, soothing the tension that had once felt insurmountable. I never wanted to hurt anyone, Mark implored, his sincerity cutting through the air. This cafe is my passion, my heart. With each passing moment, the crowd's reactions transformed from skepticism to empathy. Stories began to pour in from people recalling the kindness Mark had shown over the years, the free coffees for students, the contributions to local charities, the countless moments where he had uplifted spirits simply by being there. Empathy surged, the community banded together, forging an alliance of hope and resilience. The atmosphere shifted dramatically as Mark's words penetrated hearts, and he felt the warmth of their support wrapping around him like a comforting embrace. Someone shouted from the back, prompting a cascade of voices echoing agreement. As they rallied around him, discussing how to challenge the accusations and support Mark publicly, Eric felt a swell of pride. Mark wasn't just a businessman, he was part of something larger, a thread woven into the fabric of the community. But just as the atmosphere reached a crescendo, the door swung open with a loud crash. A group of stern-faced journalists stormed in, cameras flashing like lightning. One of them called, breaking the moment. Startled gasps filled the room. Mark froze, fear flashing across his face. Sarah whispered, gripping Eric's arm. "Mark," Eric said, his voice urgent, "you don't have to answer them, you've made your statement to us." "I have to say something," Mark murmured, the weight of the world resting heavily on his shoulders. The journalists pushed closer, desperate for an exclusive scoop. One shouted, the pressure mounting around him. In that moment, Eric felt everything unraveling. Mark stood at the crossroads. Would he speak out or succumb to the pressure? All the hope they had built now teetered on a precipice. Eric called, desperation in his voice as the crowd surged forward, a shield of support. "Please, don't let them dictate your narrative." With trembling hands, Mark raised the mic to his lips, and time seemed to slow. "Listen," he said, his voice wavering but filled with desperation. But before he could finish, the sounds of shouting erupted from outside the community center, voices rising above the chaos. Suddenly, the door flung open wider and a figure burst through, panting and wide-eyed. It was Lisa, his partner in the heart of Tyler's cafe, but she wasn't there to deliver good news. As she stumbled into the room, all eyes turned to her. She gasped, panic evident in her expression. The weight of Lisa's words hung in the air, a harbinger of catastrophe. Eric felt the ground beneath him shift once again as adrenaline surged through him. Time stopped as he processed the enormity of what was unfolding. Mark asked, his face paling. Before Lisa could respond, the tension in the air escalated. Eric looked around, fear coursing through his veins. He had fought so hard for this moment of clarity, and now it felt like everything was about to come crashing down. The crowd buzzed with anxiety, and the journalists closed in, cameras ready to capture the unraveling chaos. It was all falling apart around them, and Eric's heart raced wildly as he realized that the fight was far from over. He shouted over the noise, but what lay ahead was an uncertain path filled with shadows of doubt and fear. Would they be able to help Mark reclaim his narrative, or would this moment seal his fate? In a world swirling with chaos, they were on the cusp of a truth that could either shatter or strengthen everything they held dear. All Eric could do was stand there, heart pounding, as the storm brewed around them, teetering on the brink of catastrophe. The keycard, still tucked in his pocket, pulsed like a heartbeat, a reminder that sometimes the smallest actions can ignite the biggest change. And as they prepared to move, the weight of the moment pressed down on them, ready to launch them into an uncertain future. Would they conquer the storm together, or would fear silence them forever? Only time would tell.